He didn't hesitate when he threw the last suitcase. It hit the wet pavement hard enough to split the leather rain, soaking through clothes he'd never paid for. "Take your drama somewhere else," Daniel snapped, not even looking at his pregnant wife. Behind him, his mistress laughed. His mother stood with arms crossed, satisfied. The woman in the driveway didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just watched him. Calm. Too calm. Then she reached into her pocket and made a call. "Dad, I think I'm done pretending." And suddenly the rain wasn't the only thing about to fall. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. 3 years earlier, Daniel had believed he married a quiet, simple woman who had nothing. Back then, Elena barely stood out in a room. She wore soft colors, neutral tones, the kind of clothes you'd find on a clearance rack if you looked hard enough. She didn't wear makeup unless it was something light. She didn't talk about brands, didn't care about appearances. And when she smiled, it felt easy, like she wasn't trying to impress anyone. That was what Daniel liked at first. He was working his way up at a consulting firm in Chicago. Not top tier, not yet, but close enough that he could taste it. Long hours, constant pressure. Watching people around him move faster, dress better, live bigger. Elena felt like a break from that. She didn't expect anything from him. Their first apartment was small. 1 bedroom, thin walls, a kitchen that barely fit 2 people. But she never complained. She cooked, she budgeted. She clipped coupons like it was second nature. At first, Daniel thought it was admirable. Then slowly, it started to feel limiting. "Why do you still shop like that?" he had asked one night, watching her sort through grocery receipts at the table. She looked up confused. "Like what coupons? Discounts? You know I can afford more now." Elena had just shrugged, folding the receipt neatly. "It's not about what you can afford. It's about what you need." That answer stayed with him longer than he expected. Not because it impressed him, but because it annoyed him. He didn't want to live like he was still struggling. He wanted to feel like he'd made it. The problem was nothing in his life looked like success yet. Not the apartment, not the car, not the woman standing in his kitchen wearing a faded sweater that looked like it had been washed 100 times, and definitely not in front of his mother. Margaret Harrison didn't hide her opinion from day one. "She doesn't have presence," she had said after meeting Elena. "No polish, no ambition. Where did you even find her?" Daniel had laughed it off at the time, but his mother didn't stop. Every dinner turned into a quiet inspection. The way Elena dressed, the way she spoke, the way she didn't speak. "She has no connections," Margaret said one evening, sipping wine that cost more than Elena's weekly grocery bill. "You're building a future, Daniel. You need someone who adds to that, not someone who just exists." Elena had been sitting right there when she said it. And she didn't react. She just kept eating, calm, composed, like none of it touched her. That silence used to comfort him. Now it irritated him. Why didn't she defend herself? Why didn't she prove she was worth something? Sometimes small things didn't add up. Like the time their rent was due early and Daniel was short after a delayed bonus. He'd been pacing the living room, calculating, stressed. Elena had walked over quietly and placed an envelope on the table. Cash. More than enough. He'd stared at it. Where did this come from? She didn't hesitate. Savings. "How much do you have saved?" She smiled, soft and unreadable. Enough. It should have reassured him. Instead, it made him uneasy, because it didn't feel like she was being transparent. It felt like she was choosing not to explain. There were other moments, too. Phone calls she took in private. A different phone he saw once, sleek, expensive, nothing like the basic one she usually used. When he asked about it, she said it belonged to a friend. He didn't push. At the time, it didn't seem worth the effort. In his mind, Elena was simple, predictable, replaceable. That thought didn't come all at once. It built slowly. Through every comparison, every dinner with his mother, every time he saw someone else living the life he wanted. And then one evening, everything shifted. It happened at a networking event downtown. Glass walls, city lights, people who looked like they belonged somewhere bigger. Daniel had adjusted his jacket twice before walking in. He felt it immediately, that gap between where he was and where he wanted to be. And then he saw her. Victoria, confident, polished, effortless. She laughed easily, talked like she owned the room, knew people Daniel had only heard of. When she looked at him, really looked at him, it felt like recognition, like she saw potential, not limitation. "So, what do you do?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Consulting," he said, straightening unconsciously. Of course, she smiled. "You have that energy." No one had ever said that to him before. Not like that. They talked longer than he planned, longer than he should have. And when he finally stepped outside for air, his phone buzzed. A message from Elena. "Are you coming home soon?" He stared at the screen, then looked back through the glass at Victoria, laughing, radiant, exactly the kind of life he thought he deserved. For the first time, going home didn't feel like relief. It felt like settling. And Daniel realized something he hadn't admitted before. He didn't just want more. He thought he deserved someone better, someone who looked like success. And that night, without saying it out loud, he made a decision that would quietly begin to destroy everything he thought he was building. Daniel didn't plan to see Victoria again. That's what he told himself the morning after the networking event. It had just been a conversation, a moment, the kind of thing that happened when you were surrounded by people who made you feel like you were still climbing. But 2 days later, he found himself checking his phone more often than usual. And when a message finally came through, he answered faster than he should have. "Coffee this week," she wrote. It was simple, casual, like it meant nothing. He stared at it for a few seconds, then typed back, "Sure." He didn't tell Elena. At home, everything looked the same. Elena was in the kitchen when he walked in that night, stirring something on the stove. The smell was familiar, comforting even. "How was your day?" she asked without turning around. "Busy," he said, dropping his keys on the counter. She nodded like she always did. No follow-up questions, no pressure. That used to feel like peace. Now it felt like distance. The next afternoon, he met Victoria at a cafe downtown. Not the kind of place he usually went. Too polished, too expensive. But she fit there effortlessly. "You look like you belong here," she said, as he sat down smiling like she already knew the answer. He laughed a little stiff. "Working on it." "You don't have to work that hard," she said. "Some people just get it." No one had ever said that to him so directly. Not his co-workers, not his friends, definitely not Elena. With Elena, everything was steady, predictable. With Victoria, everything felt like possibility. They talked for over an hour, about work, about goals, about where they saw themselves in 5 years. When Daniel mentioned his current position, she didn't just listen. She leaned in. "You're under-leveraged," she said. "You're thinking too small." He frowned. "I just need time. Or you need to stop surrounding yourself with people who keep you small." That line stayed with him. Later that night back home, Elena was folding laundry in the living room. The TV was on low, something soft in the background. "You're late," she said, not accusing, just noticing. "Work," he replied. She nodded again, always nodding, always accepting. He watched her for a moment, the way she moved quietly, the way she folded each shirt with care. There was nothing wrong with it, and that was the problem. Nothing about her pushed him forward. Nothing about her made him feel like he was becoming more. "Do you ever think about doing something bigger?" he asked suddenly. Elena paused, a shirt halfway folded. "Bigger, yeah. Like more. A different job. Different life." She looked at him, then really looked at him. "I like our life," Daniel exhaled, frustrated. "That's what I mean. You're okay with this." "I'm not." She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just went back to folding. That silence hit harder than any disagreement. Over the next few weeks, the pattern settled in. Work, messages, meetings with Victoria, then home. Elena noticed the changes. Of course she did. The late nights, the shorter conversations, the way he stopped asking about her day altogether. One evening, she found a receipt in his jacket pocket. A restaurant she'd never been to. 2 glasses of wine. She didn't bring it up. Instead, she placed the receipt back exactly where she found it and continued making dinner. Daniel never knew. What he did notice was how easy it became to separate the 2 worlds. With Victoria, he felt seen, ambitious, like someone who could step into a bigger life. With Elena, he felt stuck. And slowly, without saying it out loud, he started to resent her for that feeling. His mother noticed the shift before he admitted it to himself. "I told you," Margaret said one afternoon over lunch. "She's not the kind of woman who elevates you." Daniel didn't respond right away. "She doesn't challenge you." His mother continued. "She doesn't bring anything to the table. And now you're starting to see it." He stirred his drink, watching the ice move. "She's a good person," he said, but it sounded weak even to him. "That's not enough," Margaret replied sharply. "Good doesn't build a future." That night, Daniel came home to find Elena sitting at the table with a small stack of bills. "We need to talk about the credit cards," she said gently. "The balances are getting high." He felt something snap. "Do you think I don't know that he shot back? I'm the one paying for everything." Elena didn't react to his tone. "I'm just saying we should be careful." "We," he repeated. "You don't contribute, you just manage what I bring in." The words hung in the air. For a second, he thought she might finally argue. But she didn't. She just looked at him. "Quiet. Steady." "Okay," she said softly. That was it. No fight, no defense, just that one word. And somehow that made it worse, because deep down Daniel felt like he'd just crossed a line he couldn't take back. But instead of pulling back, he leaned into it. The next time Victoria texted, he didn't hesitate. The next time she suggested dinner, he said yes. And when she brushed her hand against his across the table, he didn't move away. It felt natural, easy, right. At least that's what he told himself. That same night, as he walked her to her car, Victoria smiled at him in a way that made everything else fade. "You deserve more than what you've settled for," she said. Daniel didn't argue, because somewhere along the way he had started to believe it. And when he got home, Elena was already asleep. Or at least that's what he thought. He didn't see her eyes open in the dark. Didn't see the quiet way she turned her head toward the door. Didn't notice the phone in her hand screen dimmed a message thread open that hadn't been there before. She didn't cry. She didn't confront him. She just watched. And in that silence, she began to understand something Daniel hadn't realized yet. He wasn't just drifting away. He was choosing to. The next morning, Daniel woke up to a message from Victoria. "Let's stop pretending this is just coffee." He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he typed back, "Agreed." And just like that, a line was crossed. Not in anger, not in a fight, but in a quiet decision that would soon make everything impossible to undo. Daniel stopped pretending it was complicated. Within a week, Victoria was no longer just someone he met for coffee. She was the person he texted first in the morning and last at night. The one who made him feel like he was finally stepping into the version of himself he had always imagined. At home, everything became quieter. Elena still cooked, still kept the apartment in order, still asked if he'd eaten. But something in her tone had shifted. It was softer, almost distant, like she was already letting go of something he hadn't fully admitted he'd broken. Daniel noticed it. He just didn't care enough to question it. One night, Victoria sent him a photo. She was at a rooftop bar, city lights, behind her glass of wine in hand. "You should be here," she wrote. He looked around the apartment. Elena was at the table again, going through bills. The same stack. The same careful movements. "I have plans." he typed back. He didn't say with who. Across the room, Elena glanced up briefly. Their eyes met for a second. Then she looked back down like the moment didn't matter. That was the first time Daniel felt something close to relief. No confrontation, no drama. It made everything easier. The next few weeks blurred together. Victoria became more present. Not just in messages, but in his decisions. The way he dressed, the places he suggested for meetings, even the way he spoke at work. You need to think bigger, she kept telling him. People can feel it when you don't believe you belong. He started believing her. At the same time, the cracks in his finances deepened. Credit cards climbed higher. Expenses stretched thinner. The lifestyle he wanted was always just out of reach, and somehow he blamed Elena for that too. You don't understand pressure, he snapped one evening when she gently suggested cutting back on unnecessary spending. You've never had to build anything. Elena didn't argue. She just listened. I'm just trying to help, she said quietly. Then stop making everything about limits. He replied. I need someone who pushes forward, not someone who's afraid to spend $1. The words hung between them. For a moment, Elena looked like she might say something more. But she didn't. She simply nodded and went back to washing the dishes. That silence again. That same calm, steady silence that used to feel like support. Now it felt like judgment. The tension built slowly after that. It showed up in small ways. Daniel stopped eating dinner at home most nights. Said he had late meetings, client events, networking opportunities. Elena stopped asking for details. One evening, Margaret invited them both to dinner. Elena wore a simple black dress. Clean, modest, the kind that didn't try too hard. Victoria arrived 20 minutes later, uninvited. But Margaret welcomed her like she belonged there. Oh, good you made it, she said, smiling in a way she never had for Elena. Daniel was just telling me about your work. Elena paused slightly at the doorway, taking in the scene. Then she walked in and took her seat. Dinner was uncomfortable. Not loud, not explosive, just quietly cruel. Margaret asked Victoria about her career, her connections, her travel. Victoria answered easily, confidently, every word reinforcing the image of someone successful. When Margaret finally turned to Elena, her tone changed. And you? She asked. Still managing the household. Elena nodded. Yes. That must be fulfilling, Margaret said, though her expression suggested the opposite. Daniel didn't step in. He didn't redirect the conversation. He just kept eating. That was the moment something inside Elena shifted. Not outwardly. She didn't react, didn't defend herself. But inside, something settled. A decision. Victoria leaned closer to Daniel during dessert, her hand brushing his arm like it was natural. So she said lightly, have you thought about what we talked about? Margaret watched them with quiet approval. Elena didn't look up. Daniel hesitated for a second. Then he said, yeah, I have. Victoria smiled. That was enough. On the drive home, the silence between Daniel and Elena felt different. He expected tension, questions. Instead, there was nothing, just the sound of the road. You embarrassed me tonight, he said finally. Elena turned her head slightly. How you just sat there. Said nothing. You make it look like I chose someone who doesn't belong in that room. Elena studied him for a moment. I didn't realize I was supposed to perform, she said softly. That's exactly the problem, Daniel snapped. You don't even see it. The words came faster now. You don't try, you don't adapt, you don't grow. You're just there. And I'm tired of pretending that's enough. Elena didn't interrupt. She let him finish. When he finally stopped breathing a little heavier than before, she spoke. If I'm not enough, Daniel, then say it clearly. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. For a moment he almost hesitated. But then Victoria's voice echoed in his mind. You deserve more. I think we both know this isn't working. he said. The car slowed at a red light. Elena nodded once. Not surprised. Not emotional. Just certain. Okay, she said. That was it. No argument, no tears, just that one word again. And somehow that made the air in the car feel heavier. That night after they got home, Daniel went straight to the bedroom. He didn't notice Elena stay behind in the living room. He didn't see her pull out a small folder from the bottom drawer of the cabinet. Documents. Neatly organized. Bank statements. Property records. A contact card with a law firm's name embossed in clean silver letters. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and typed a short message. I think it's time to move forward. She hit send. And somewhere miles away, someone received it instantly. By the time Daniel fell asleep, convinced he had finally taken control of his life, Elena had already made a decision he couldn't undo, and the next step wasn't going to be quiet. The rain started just before sunset. Not heavy at first. Just a steady drizzle that blurred the streetlights and made everything look colder than it really was. By the time Daniel pulled into the driveway, it had picked up tapping against the windshield in uneven rhythms. He sat there for a moment, engine still running. Victoria had just texted him. Tonight he stared at the message, then at the house. The small, two-story place he had once been proud of. It didn't look impressive anymore. Not compared to the places he'd started imagining himself in. He typed back, "Come over." When he walked inside, Elena was already in the living room. A small overnight bag rested near the couch, not packed fully. Just enough to notice. She looked up when he entered. "You're early," she said. "I'm done," he replied. 2 simple words. He didn't explain them, didn't soften them. Elena's eyes flicked briefly toward the bag, then back to him. "I see," she said. No anger, no panic. Just that same calm. It unsettled him more than anything else. Victoria arrived 20 minutes later. She didn't knock long before Daniel opened the door. She stepped inside like she belonged there, heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Her coat was expensive, her perfume stronger than the room itself. "Oh," she said lightly when she saw Elena. "You didn't mention she'd still be here." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't introduce them either. Elena stood slowly, her hand resting against the back of the couch for balance. The pregnancy was beginning to show now. Not dramatic, but enough to notice if you looked. Victoria noticed. Her gaze lingered for a second too long before she smiled again. "Well," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "This is awkward." Elena didn't answer. She walked past them quietly and picked up her bag. Daniel watched her, waiting for something. A question, a protest, anything. Nothing came. That silence started to irritate him again. "You don't have to act like this," he said. "We both know this isn't working." Elena paused near the doorway, then turned back slightly. "Is that what this is?" she asked. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Don't make it complicated." Victoria leaned casually against the wall, watching the exchange like it was a scene she'd already predicted. "It's not complicated," she added. "Some people just outgrow each other." Elena looked at her then, really looked at her. There was no anger in her expression, just a quiet assessment. Then she nodded once, almost to herself. "All right," she said. That word again, always that word. Daniel felt a flicker of something he couldn't name, but he pushed it down. "Take what you need," he said. "I'll have the rest moved later." Elena didn't move. Instead, she set the bag back down. "I'll take everything now," she said calmly. Victoria let out a soft laugh. In this weather, good luck with that. The rain outside had intensified, hitting the windows harder now. Daniel shrugged. "That's not my problem." The words came out colder than he expected. Elena held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded again. "Okay." She walked toward the bedroom. Daniel stayed in the living room with Victoria. He could hear drawers opening, the sound of hangers sliding across the closet rod, suitcases being pulled out. It took longer than he thought it would. Victoria poured herself a drink without asking. She moved comfortably through the space like she had already claimed it. "You're doing the right thing," she said, handing him a glass. "You've been stuck for too long." Daniel took it, though he didn't drink. "I know," he replied, but the words didn't feel as solid as they should have. When Elena came back out, she was carrying the first suitcase. It looked heavier than it should have. Daniel noticed the brand for a split second. The stitching, the leather. Something about it felt expensive, but he dismissed the thought. She set it by the door and went back for another. Trip after trip. No complaints, no hesitation. Just quiet efficiency. By the time she finished, the rain was pouring. The driveway was slick, reflecting the porch light in broken patterns. Elena reached for the first suitcase. Daniel stepped forward before he could think. "Just leave it," he said. "I'll deal with it later." She shook her head. "No, I'll take my things." Victoria watched, amused. "This is actually kind of sad," she murmured. "She really thinks she can just walk out and start over." Elena didn't respond. She stepped outside. The rain soaked through her clothes almost instantly. Daniel followed, irritation rising again. "Are you serious right now?" he called out. "You're making a scene." Elena kept walking. That was when something in him snapped. He grabbed the next suitcase and hurled it down the steps. It hit the pavement hard, the sound sharp against the rain. "Take it and go," he said. "I'm done with this." Behind him, Victoria laughed. From the doorway, Margaret appeared, drawn by the noise. She took in the scene quickly. Elena in the rain. The suitcases scattered. Victoria inside. And Daniel standing between them. Her lips curled slightly. "Well," she said, stepping forward, "it's about time." Elena stopped at the end of the driveway. For a moment, she didn't move. The rain ran down her face, her hair, her clothes. Daniel expected something now. A breakdown. A reaction. Anything that would make this feel real. Instead, she turned slowly and looked at all of them. Not with anger, not with hurt, but with something else. Something colder. More certain. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Daniel frowned slightly. For the first time that night, something didn't feel right. Elena raised the phone to her ear and spoke one quiet sentence. "Dad, I think it's time." The rain kept falling, but suddenly Daniel had the strange, unsettling feeling that he had just made a mistake he didn't fully understand yet. And somewhere in the distance, a set of headlights turned onto their street. The headlights didn't pass. They slowed. Then, one by one, more lights appeared behind the first, cutting through the rain in a line too deliberate to ignore. Daniel squinted through the downpour, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. 3 vehicles, no 4. All black, clean, expensive in a way that didn't need logos. They turned onto the driveway without hesitation. Victoria straightened beside him, her earlier amusement fading. "What is this?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. Something in his chest tightened as the first SUV came to a smooth stop, just a few feet from where Elena stood. The engine idled quietly, almost respectfully, like it knew exactly where it was supposed to be. Elena didn't move. She stood in the rain, soaked through one hand resting lightly against her stomach, the other still holding her phone. The driver stepped out first, tall, composed. He walked around the vehicle and opened the rear door without rushing. Then a man stepped out. Late 60s, silver hair, impeccable suit that somehow didn't look out of place in the rain. Not because it was meant for weather, but because the man wearing it didn't adjust to environments. Environments adjusted to him. Daniel felt it immediately. That shift in the air. The kind that didn't come from volume or aggression. Just presence. The man's eyes went straight to Elena. Not to Daniel, not to Victoria, not to Margaret standing frozen in the doorway. Only Elena. "You're wet," he said calmly, as if that was the only problem in front of him. "I'm fine," Elena replied. Her voice was different now, still soft, still controlled. But there was something else in it, something Daniel had never heard before. Familiarity, warmth, respect. The man nodded once, then gestured slightly. Someone from the second vehicle stepped forward immediately, holding an umbrella over Elena, without needing to be told twice. Victoria let out a small, uncertain laugh. "Okay, seriously, what is this?" Margaret didn't laugh. She was staring, not at the cars, at Elena. Her face had gone pale in a way Daniel had never seen before. "Elena," she said slowly, like she was testing the name for the first time. "Your last name. What was it again?" Elena didn't answer her. Instead, she looked at the man in front of her. "I'm done," she said quietly. "I gave them enough time." The man's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes sharpened. He turned his head slightly, and for the first time he looked at Daniel. It wasn't a long look, but it felt like being measured in a single glance. "You're Daniel," the man said. It wasn't a question. Daniel swallowed. "Yeah." There was a beat of silence. Rain hitting the pavement, engines humming softly. Then the man asked one simple thing. "Did you throw her out?" Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "It's not like that," he'd said finally. The man raised a hand, not aggressively, just enough to stop him. "I asked a yes or no question." Daniel felt something slip, something he couldn't grab back. "Yes." The word came out quieter than he expected. Behind him, Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Margaret took a step forward, her voice suddenly urgent. "Mr. Sir, this is a misunderstanding. You didn't realize what the man asked, his tone still even." Margaret hesitated. Her eyes flicked between Elena and the man, something dawning too late. "Elena Wellington," she whispered. The name landed, not loudly, but heavily. Daniel blinked. Wellington. He knew that name. Everyone did. Buildings downtown, articles, rankings, the kind of wealth people talked about like it belonged to another world. His gaze snapped to Elena. She didn't look different, still soaked, still standing in the same place. But suddenly everything about her felt wrong. Or maybe it had always been wrong. He just hadn't seen it. The man, her father, didn't react to Margaret's realization. He stepped closer to Elena instead. "You should be inside," he said. "I'm fine," she repeated. Her eyes moved just briefly. From her father, to Daniel, then to Victoria, and finally to Margaret. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something quieter, something final. "I wanted to see it clearly," she said. "Now I have." Daniel felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. "What are you talking about?" he said, sharper now. "Elena, this is getting ridiculous. You can't just—" She looked at him again, and for the first time in 3 years he felt like he was looking at someone he didn't know. "You never asked," she said. The sentence was simple, but it cut deeper than anything else that night. What he frowned. "You never asked who I was," she continued. "You decided for me." Daniel shook his head. "I knew enough." A small pause. Then Elena nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "You did." Her father stepped forward slightly, his attention returning fully to Daniel now. "Everything you believe you built," he said. "We'll go through that in detail." The calm in his voice made it worse, because it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a plan. Victoria stepped back without realizing it. Margaret gripped the edge of the doorway, and Daniel, standing in the rain, felt something cold settle into his stomach, because for the first time that night he understood one thing clearly. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had completely misjudged the one person in his life he thought he understood. And whatever was about to happen next, he wasn't in control of it anymore. The rain didn't stop. It softened slightly, but the air still felt heavy, like something had shifted and hadn't settled yet. No one moved for a few seconds. Not Daniel, not Victoria, not Margaret. Even the men by the SUVs stood still waiting. Elena's father took a step forward, not toward Daniel, toward the house. He looked at it once, calm, assessing, like it was a piece of information, not a place where his daughter had lived for 3 years. Then he turned back. "You should come inside," he said to Elena. She shook her head. "No, I want this handled here." There was no defiance in her voice, just clarity. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. "Handled," he repeated. "What does that even mean? This is my house." The words came out automatically. Instinct. Something to reassert control. Elena didn't respond. Her father did. "No," he said simply. "It isn't." The sentence landed harder than anything else that night. Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about?" The man gestured lightly toward one of the assistants standing near the second vehicle. A folder appeared almost instantly, handed over with quiet efficiency. He opened it without looking down. "I don't enjoy correcting people," he said, "but accuracy matters." He held the folder just enough for Daniel to see. Property documents, names, numbers, signatures. Daniel stepped closer despite himself. "This property," the man continued, "is owned by a holding company. That company is part of a trust." Daniel's chest tightened. "Yeah, my mortgage is paid into that trust," the man finished calmly. Silence. Rain tapping softly now. Daniel blinked. "That doesn't make sense," he said. "I bought this house." "You signed paperwork," the man replied. "That's not the same thing." Daniel felt heat rise to his face. "What are you saying?" he asked, sharper now. "That she owns it." He didn't mean for it to sound like a challenge, but it did. Elena's father didn't react. Yes. Just that. One word. And suddenly the ground under Daniel's feet didn't feel as solid as it had a minute ago. "That's not possible," he said. "I've been making payments for years, and those payments," the man said, "have been routed exactly where they were meant to go." Daniel shook his head. No, there has to be some mistake." "There isn't." The calm in his voice made it worse, because there was no argument to fight, no emotion to push against. Victoria stepped back another inch. Her hand, which had been resting casually at her side, now hovered uncertainly, like she wasn't sure where she belonged anymore. Margaret spoke next, her voice unsteady. "This is absurd," she said. "Daniel works for his money. He built this life." Elena's father turned his attention to her. Built what he asked. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, because suddenly she wasn't sure. Daniel jumped in. "I have a job," he said. "I work at Richardson Consulting. I've earned everything I have." Another small pause. Then the man nodded. "Yes," he said. "You work there?" Daniel felt a flicker of relief. "Finally. Something normal. Something real." Then the man continued. "Richardson Consulting was acquired 8 months ago." Daniel frowned. "Yeah, I know that." "New leadership, new structure, new ownership," the man said. "Under a subsidiary." He let the silence stretch just long enough, then added, "Of the same trust." Daniel stared at him. The words didn't land right away. They floated, disconnected. Then slowly, painfully, they started to make sense. "No," he said quietly. "That's not no." Elena didn't look at him. She kept her gaze steady somewhere just past him, like she wasn't part of the moment anymore, like she had already stepped out of it. "You've been employed," her father said, "by an entity ultimately controlled by my family." Daniel's breath caught. "That's not—" "It is." The interruption was gentle, final. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the rain soaking through it. "This is insane," he muttered. "You're saying everything my job, my house has been connected to her life," the man said. "Not aggressive, not loud, just true." Daniel looked at Elena then. Really looked. The same woman. Same quiet presence. Same calm expression. But now every memory twisted. Every moment where she had seemed small. Where she had stepped back. Where she hadn't argued. It didn't feel like weakness anymore. It felt like restraint. You knew he set his voice lower now. You knew all of this. Elena nodded slightly. Yes. The word hit him harder than anything else. For how long, he asked. A pause. Then she answered. Long enough. Victoria let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but it didn't carry the same confidence as before. "This is crazy," she said. "You're telling me she just..." What played poor? No one responded to her, because suddenly she didn't matter in the same way. Margaret took a step back, her hand gripping the doorframe. "You let this happen," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You let us treat you like..." Elena turned her head then, finally looking at her. "I didn't make you do anything," she said softly. And that was the truth Margaret couldn't escape. Daniel swallowed. Hard. "You should have told me," he said. "You can't just hide something like that and expect what Elena asked." Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped him. "Respect," she continued. "Kindness, basic decency." Daniel didn't answer, because he didn't have one. The rain fell lighter now, almost gone. But the damage had already been done. Elena's father closed the folder and handed it back to the assistant. "This isn't about punishment," he said calmly. "It's about clarity." Daniel let out a hollow laugh. "Feels like punishment. It feels like consequence," the man corrected. That word settled deep, heavy, unavoidable. Daniel looked around. At the house. At Victoria, now standing further away than before. At his mother, who no longer looked certain about anything. Then back at Elena. And for the first time he realized something he hadn't before. He hadn't just lost control tonight. He had never really had it. And whatever came next wasn't going to be something he could talk his way out of. No one spoke for a while after that. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving behind a cold dampness that clung to everything. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt heavy, like something had already been decided, and they were just standing inside the aftermath. Daniel shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt. This is overkill," he said, trying to steady his voice. "Whatever this is, it doesn't need to be this dramatic." Elena's father didn't react immediately. He glanced briefly at one of the men standing nearby, then back at Daniel. "Nothing here is dramatic," he said calmly. "It's administrative." That word hit differently. Administrative. Like everything Daniel had built could be reduced to paperwork. "I'm not some random guy you can just push around," Daniel said, his tone rising despite himself. "I have a job. I have responsibilities. You can't just..." "You're right," the man said. Daniel paused. A flicker of hope. Then it disappeared just as quickly. "I can't do anything," he continued. "My attorneys can." There it was. The shift. Subtle but undeniable. Victoria stiffened beside him. Margaret let out a small breath, almost like she had been holding it for too long. Elena stood still under the umbrella, her expression unchanged. "You'll be contacted," her father said, his voice even. "Regarding the property, your employment, and any relevant financial obligations." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "Financial obligations," he repeated. "What does that mean?" "It means clarity," the man replied, "about what is yours, and what never was." Daniel ran a hand down his face, frustration bleeding into something closer to panic. "This is insane," he muttered. "You can't just take everything." "I'm not taking anything," the man said. "I'm correcting a misunderstanding." That word again. Misunderstanding. As if the past 3 years could be explained away like a misread contract. Victoria stepped closer to Daniel, her voice lower now. "This is getting out of hand," she whispered. "You need to say something." He didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long time, Daniel didn't have an angle, didn't have a way to talk his way into control. Everything he said sounded weaker the moment it left his mouth. Margaret tried next. "Mr. Wellington," she said carefully, her tone stripped of its usual superiority. "There's no need to escalate this. Whatever happened tonight, we can handle it privately." Elena's father looked at her. Really looked at her. "You handled it publicly," he said, "in the rain." Margaret flinched. That was all it took. The memory of what she had done, what she had allowed herself to do, suddenly felt very real. She looked at Elena, searching for something. An opening. A chance to soften the situation, but Elena didn't offer it. She didn't step in. She didn't defend them. She just stood there, present, unmoved. Daniel swallowed. "Elena," he said, his voice dropping now, almost pleading without meaning to. "This doesn't have to go this far." She turned her head slightly toward him. "Then where should it have stopped?" she asked. The question was quiet, but it landed harder than anything else. Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because there wasn't a point he could point to. Not a moment where he had chosen differently. Not a line he hadn't crossed. "You had options," she said. "Every day, no accusation, just truth. I didn't hide anything from you that mattered." She continued, "I gave you a life, a partnership, time." Daniel shook his head, struggling to regain ground. "You hid everything that mattered," he said. "You let me believe you were nothing." There it was, the word. It slipped out before he could stop it. Nothing. Elena didn't react outwardly, but something in her eyes changed. Not hurt, not anger, just confirmation. "That wasn't something I made you believe," she said softly. And he knew she was right, because he had decided that on his own. Victoria stepped back again, this time more noticeably. Her earlier confidence had disappeared completely. This wasn't the situation she thought she was stepping into. This wasn't a simple upgrade. Margaret's grip on the doorframe tightened. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice smaller than Daniel had ever heard it. Elena's father answered without hesitation. "Now," he said, "we proceed properly." He turned slightly, addressing one of the men near the vehicles. "Make sure everything is documented," he said. A quiet nod. Phones came out. Photos, notes. Not chaotic, not rushed, systematic. Daniel watched it happen and felt something sink in deeper. This wasn't emotional. It wasn't revenge. It was process. And that made it worse. Because process didn't bend. It didn't forgive. "Elena," he said again, "one last attempt. We can talk about this. Just us." She looked at him fully this time. For a brief second, something softer flickered. A memory. Maybe of who he had been at the beginning. Then it was gone. "We already did," she said. And that was it. No second chance hidden in her tone. No door left open. Just a quiet ending. Her father stepped back slightly, signaling the moment was over. "Get her things," he said to his team. They moved immediately. Careful, efficient. The suitcases Daniel had thrown minutes earlier were lifted as if they mattered, as if they had always mattered. Daniel stood there watching strangers handle pieces of a life he thought was his. And for the first time, he didn't feel angry. He felt irrelevant, because everything that was happening no longer depended on him. Victoria didn't touch him anymore. Margaret didn't speak, and Elena was already leaving. She stepped toward the vehicle, guided gently by the man holding the umbrella. Just before she reached the door, she paused. Not turning around fully, just enough. "Goodbye, Daniel." No emotion, no hesitation, just closure. The door closed behind her. The engine started. And as the first SUV began to pull away, Daniel stood in the driveway, soaked, silent, and finally aware of something he hadn't understood until it was too late. This wasn't the moment he lost her. That had happened long before. This was just the moment he realized it. 6 months later, the noise had faded. Not completely. It never did. Legal letters still arrived. Financial statements still shifted. There were still conversations happening in offices Daniel would never step into again. But the storm itself had passed, and what remained was quieter, more honest. Elena didn't go back to the life people assumed she had always lived. She didn't move into a mansion. She didn't surround herself with luxury. Instead, she chose a smaller home on the edge of the city, close enough to everything, but far enough to breathe. The kind of place where mornings were slow and evenings didn't carry the weight of expectation. Her days changed. They became simpler, intentional. She spent most of her time preparing for the child she was about to bring into the world. Doctor appointments, quiet walks, long afternoons with books she had once set aside. For the first time in years, she wasn't managing someone else's perception of her. She was just living. The wealth was still there. The family empire hadn't disappeared. The trust funds, the ownership structures, the quiet control her name carried, it all remained untouched. But it no longer defined her days. What mattered now was peace. And for the first time in a long time, she had it. Across the city, Daniel's life moved in the opposite direction. The job he once held on to so tightly didn't survive the fallout. The connections that used to return his calls stopped answering. The company he believed he was building a future with quietly distanced itself once the truth came out. Not because of Elena, but because of him. His decisions, his behavior, his lack of judgment. The reality settled in slowly. There was no dramatic collapse, no single moment where everything disappeared. It was more subtle than that. Emails that never got replies, opportunities that never came back. People who once respected him, now speaking carefully, or not at all. Victoria left within weeks. Not with a fight, not with an explanation, just absence. Margaret changed too. The confidence she once carried turned into something quieter. Regret, maybe. But not the kind that fixed anything, the kind that just stayed. Daniel found himself alone more often than not. And in that silence, the truth became impossible to ignore. He hadn't lost Elena because she was hiding something. He lost her because of what he chose to see. Months later, he passed by a small community center during a routine walk he had started forcing himself into. There was nothing remarkable about the building. No sign of wealth, no hint of power. But he recognized her car. Simple, clean, familiar. He stopped. Through the glass, he saw her. Elena stood inside, speaking to a small group of women. Some of them looked tired. Some looked like they had been through more than they knew how to explain. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, it was calm, grounded, real. It wasn't charity in the way people imagined. It wasn't about money. It was about presence, about giving people something she had once needed herself, a place to feel seen. Daniel didn't go inside. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there for a moment longer than he should have, watching, understanding. For the first time, he saw her clearly. Not as the billionaire wife he had discovered too late, not as the hidden heiress tied to a family empire, but as the woman who had stood in the rain losing everything and still held on to herself. That was the part he never understood, and the part he could never get back. Elena turned slightly as if she sensed something. For a brief second, their eyes met through the glass. There was no anger in hers, no invitation either. Just distance. And something else, peace. Daniel lowered his gaze. And this time he didn't try to fix it, because some things weren't meant to be fixed. They were meant to be understood and carried. Elena looked away first. She turned back to the women in front of her, continuing as if nothing had happened. Because for her, nothing needed to be proven anymore. Not her worth, not her identity, not her strength. She had already lived through the moment where all of that was questioned. And she walked away from it with something far more valuable than anything Daniel had ever chased. She kept her dignity. And in the end, that was the only thing that truly mattered. Some people don't lose everything when they walk away. Some people finally find it. If this story left you thinking about how we measure people or what really matters in a relationship, share your thoughts below. Sometimes the quietest lessons stay with us the longest.